All right. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And my name is Joe Rogister, and super excited to be hosting tonight's call. Tonight we've got two absolute legends on with us. I have to say that after doing, tons of interviews over the past 14 months, top level doctors, scientists, athletes. I don't know if I've ever been as excited about a dialogue as I am about this one. Because really, this is exactly what Prove It and Keto OS and the ketone movement is all about. It's a very holistic view of health, of nutrition, and of human optimization. Right? People always talk about they experience ketones because they were looking to lose fat, but then they stay on the ketones because of the mental clarity that they get. And they say, they get it maybe for their husbands or for their spouse because they want their husband to have, more energy when he comes home from work, but they keep buying it for him because they say he's much nicer when he takes them, right? And I see people smirking. That is no joke. And he stays on it because he's also losing some of his spare tires, belly fat, and he doesn't have to give up everything that he loves. So whatever reason that people come and experience ketones or exogenous ketones or keto OS, it's doing more for you than you can possibly imagine. And that's why we put such a heavy focus on education. Right? And that's what tonight's all about. So tonight I'm going to be moderating a conversation between two, first off, a top scientist in the ketone world. He's one of the top holistic health practitioners in the ketone world. He's also a naturopath. He's a Paul Chek certified practitioner. He is an author, a speaker. Not only has he worked with some of the top athletes in Australia, New Zealand, this side of the world, but he's also a top athlete himself. He's a world champion weightlifter. So no slouch in that arena. But you're rarely, more than all that, you're rarely going to meet someone that is as passionate about helping people, not only recover from health conditions, but also just furthering the research on this product so that more people can, realize what this can actually do for them, and he can help more people achieve their goals. So he's an absolute rock star. If you've been looking at the ketone world for a little while, then Cliff Harvey is no stranger. I always say that he makes science very cool, and he does, and I'm sure he will tonight. So Cliff, thank you very much for joining us, bud.
Thanks, Joe.
No problem, man. Absolute pleasure to have you on. Always is. Equally, big pleasure getting to know you and learning from you over the past little while. And this is, as this conversation has grown, so many people are becoming attracted to this product for whatever reason. So it's also been an absolute pleasure to get to know our other guest tonight, only for a short amount of time. But really, when I came to Australia 5 years ago and I got into the fitness world and the CrossFit world, I immediately knew about her. So Amanda Allen is a legend in the world of CrossFit. Literally the epitome of mental and physical strength, and not just because she absolutely crushes it at the CrossFit Games, not because she's crushing workouts and has been doing it for years, but there is so much more to this story that we're going to get into tonight. So also a publisher of 4 books. She's won 2 CrossFit World titles. Amanda, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Joe. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I can't wait to spend the next 30 minutes with you all.
Yeah, well, look, you've been inspiring, people for a long time, literally, followed by thousands and thousands of people, been an inspiration to not only men and women in the CrossFit world for years, but I mean, you also run health retreats, you do online sports and nutrition training, you got 2 CrossFit boxes, literally elite in every sense of the word of athletics and athleticism. And so I really want to, start with the physical performance side of things with you. And I guess, to start off, when you compete at the level that you have, at the level that you do, would it be a fair thing to say that, you know what's going on with your body?
I know everything that's going on with my body, every 1% of every moment, of every decision, of every movement, of every recovery, of everything. And it's the only way to reach the top is to be the expert in the field of self-knowledge.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously, everything that goes into your body, and you have dealt with and tried and been presented with a lot of different supplements over the years.
I mean, that's the fascinating thing is, you know, I've, and I know we'll get into this later, but, you know, I am a two-time CrossFit Games world champion, and, you know, at the highest level in my field of CrossFit, you know, in my 40s, 40, 45, 46, 47 years old. But what I've had to do is overcome alcoholism and depression. And, but for CrossFit to be the best in the world requires that I attend every 1% of everything I do, and that is my nutrition, my thought patterns, my training, my recovery, you know, whether I'm floating, whether I'm in the infrared sauna, what supplements I'm taking, the naturopaths I work with, the books I read, like the podcasts I listen to. And, you know, it's a never ending rabbit hole that I have poured myself into with the addictive passion that my type of personality possesses. And, you know, I channel that into the most positive manner and areas that I possibly can, and the results speak for themselves. You know, I've walked a fine line with aging and performance at the highest level in probably one of the toughest sports in the world. And you know, enter ketones about what are we now? Probably 3 months ago. I'm 12 weeks in, and you know, I wish this had been part of my story years ago, because what I see it doing with me now is extremely exciting. I'm still excited every day by what I am experiencing in terms of performance and recovery and mental clarity and motivation, and the list goes on.
And so, I mean, that's the thing, right? There's so many aspects to what you do, and I'd love to kind of go through them. And if it's okay with you, kind of have a little bit of a, you know, hearing from you what you've experienced with exogenous ketones, and then getting the kind of scientific side of exactly why that's happening from Cliff.
Great.
So I guess, you know, to start off, you know, you'd consider yourself an endurance athlete, not a strength athlete.
That's absolutely my background, you know, like world, state, national, world champion, or world titles in triathlon. So that's where I've come from, and that's what I'm comfortable doing, a long grind. So any strength gains, I have to work, you know, they're my weakness, so I have to work doubly hard to achieve them. Yeah, absolutely.
And so what has this done for you from a strength standpoint?
Yeah, actually, it's fascinating. I was just reflecting on that today. So 12 weeks ago, I began a cycle and with testing, and as embarrassed as I am to say, my back squat was only 90 kilos. But what I have done is turn that around in 10 weeks, I'm doing a workout with 95 kilo back squats without trouble. And that's a fairly significant improvement in a pretty short space of time for a 47-year-old woman, if you ask me.
Yeah, so it's more than I can do. So that is fairly impressive.
You know, and it's progress. And, you know, in my experience, you know, 7 years at a highest level, you know, training, you know, 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, what I've achieved in this last 10 to 12 weeks is quite phenomenal. And I'm still it's like I'm having to recalibrate my understanding of my own body. And that after 7 years of being way down that rabbit hole of elite performance is really saying something.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what, from you know, now from an endurance standpoint, from your bread and butter, I mean, you're already, you know, in that elite level. What's it done for you there?
Yeah, I think anybody who's spent much time doing CrossFit will know, you know, Fran as a workout or Karen as a workout, 150 wall balls. And, you know, I did that workout not too long ago, and I was, you know, maybe 10, 12 seconds off my personal record, which is around 5 minutes 30. But I came off for that workout without the level of fatigue that I've known to experience. And same with Fran. I'm 10 and 12 seconds off my personal best from 5 years ago, and I'm walking away from these workouts not understanding why I'm not flat on the floor, unable to move, and that is happening even during the workout. I'm not at that ragged edge that I've had to control with every fiber of my being. I liken it to being holding myself to the fire, but not being burnt anymore. And if you know what it's like to be a high level athlete, to hold yourself there and know that that's the place that you have to go, that others aren't willing to go, it burns, but you know how to manage that pain. Well, that pain is not what I've known it to be in the past. It's not the fire that I've always held myself to. And I am fascinated to hear what Cliff has to say about why that is so, because I'm staggered by the depth and breadth of the benefits of ketones in every area that it is required to become the athlete at the level that I've become.
Well, that's thank you for a perfect pass over to Cliff on that one. I would love to, Cliff, hear from you exactly, like why is Amanda, why are so many athletes at all these different levels finding and experiencing what Amanda's experiencing, from a strength, let's start with from a strength and an endurance standpoint during this high output exercises?
I think that's one of the really interesting things from Amanda's experience, and we're seeing this a little bit more now. There hasn't been a lot of research done on strength athletes taking exogenous ketones, right? And let's take the instance of a 1 RM lift, so 1 repetition maximum. Ketones or any sort of fat-derived fuel are not really going to come into play as a fuel for that lift because it's over so quickly, right? Even glucose isn't used as a fuel. It's basically just relying on that creatine phosphate to ATP system. So, these high explosive things that are under sort of 10 seconds in duration. You're basically not using any of the macros for that. So what we're starting to see, though, is interesting that people are getting strength benefits from ketones. And I think some of the reasons for this is predominantly through to the neural benefits, right? So there's a lot of neural benefits from ketones. They're providing fuel directly to the brain. And the biggest limiting factor outside of the fact that if you're just not strong enough, the biggest limiting factor to whether you're going to do really well in a 1 RM lift is basically how well you're facilitating the body from the brain. So it's that neurophysiological connection. And so I think it's really interesting now to begin to see that people are getting strength benefits, and it's probably derived from the fact that they're fueling their brain better. They have more available fuel. It can also be that ketones, we suspect, are very stress protective, right? So when you're taking ketones, there's less need for the body to basically tap into a high level stress response to free up glucose to use as fuel under that stress response. Now, as anyone who's been a high level strength athlete will know, if you get overexcited, you need to be excited to a certain degree, but if you get overstressed, over anxious, overexcited, your performance is going to go through the floor. And that sort of speaks to an interesting experience I had, many years ago now when I was fighting, either boxing or doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wrestling. I noticed that I was much better in my rounds when I was on a ketogenic diet than not. And I think that was predominantly because I was less stressed, I was less anxious, and so I was less likely to burn out and gas in the way that you will if you're, fighting a dude for 5 minutes.
And so you yourself, have had, have been taking exogenous ketones for around a little bit longer, maybe than Amanda has. But you were just telling me that you're getting back into the powerlifting world, yeah?
Yeah, I'm working back from a couple of pretty serious back injuries. I used to do a lot of one-armed lifts, and I think lifting 180 kilos with one hand wasn't always the best thing to do. It's sort of quite easy to throw your back out. So I'm coming back from that. So really, really interested in the effects of the ketones, basically for reducing inflammation and helping with that neural repair as well. I've done a lot of fighting as well, so I've sustained quite a few brain injuries, and anything that's going to help to heal nervous tissue is pretty cool in my book. And we've actually seen that with CrossFitters. I know that, our good buddy Luke McGrew in New Zealand, he credits ketones a lot with helping him to recover from his back injuries. And it's predominantly due to that, or likely to be due to that neural repair effect.
Right. And I mean, it's a good question, back to you, Amanda. I mean, the volume of training that you have to do, from we'll relate it back to inflammation when I ask Cliff more about it, but how is this doing for you, recovery from workout, not just right after a Fran, but, throughout the week, and what's that doing for your, quality of life outside the box?
Well, this is what I find just so extraordinarily fascinating and powerful about ketones. And I am so hypersensitive to inflammation and have been, aging is the war against inflammation, high level athletic performance is the war against inflammation. So the faster I recover, the better I am from the next athlete who will line up against me. So I've done everything in my power throughout my years in CrossFit to reduce inflammation. And, I can go so far down that rabbit hole, but what I'm doing now, like I've relied on magnesium significantly. I've relied on floating and infrared saunas, but I'm with the work that I'm doing with my businesses, I'm as high a level stress as I've ever been in terms of my outside world, beyond training. And then my training is, as I've doubled it, I'm doing double days now the last few weeks, and I feel no soreness. I have no injuries. I'm training, 3.5 hours a day at a pretty intense level. And I am backing that up over and over and over again. I don't have my vitamin Bs and my magnesiums, and I'm not relying on that naturopath that I have been for 7 years now, on a monthly, 6 weekly basis. I don't have the plethora of supplements that I've always relied on to reduce my inflammation as one aspect of my inflammatory management protocol. It's positive stuff.
So an interesting thing has popped up in the research recently, Joe, as well, which is that inflammation can reduce ketogenesis, right? So people who are highly inflammatory, even though ketones reduce inflammation, when people are heavily inflamed and they're trying to get into ketosis, that will inhibit their ability. So it's an interesting one because it shows a really valuable role for helping people to reduce that inflammation so that they can also then begin to produce their own ketones.
Yeah, right. And I mean, from some of the other research that I've been seeing, this is, kind of, I guess, one of the biggest, most emerging things is this as a signaling molecule for anti-inflammatory pathways, for, upregulating anti-inflammatory and then downregulating the inflammatory. So, I mean, why, what's the other aspects of what this is doing for Amanda, and why aren't people getting as sore, and why are people experiencing this?
I mean, that's the thing, right? You're getting an interesting cross-section of effects. You're getting fuel that you can use really easily. You're getting a reduction in inflammation. In terms of, recovery, a lot of the recovery as well, we've got to remember, is neural recovery, right? So we're fueling neurons very effectively. And if we have happened to sustain some brain injury, neural injury of some sort, as a lot of people will, even if they haven't been hit in the head as much as I have, they might have still damaged their brains through, alcohol or drugs or high sugar intake and all those types of things. Their body's not or their brain is not going to be able to use glucose as effectively anyway. The glucose transporters get really damaged. So ketones are going to help with that. So they're going to help to fuel. Interestingly, there's so many other effects though. Ketones will change the GABA to glutamate ratio. So that will allow the brain to be more relaxed. They'll also allow more free adenosine in the brain, which also allows the brain to relax. So we basically sleep better. We've got more fuel. We sleep better. We're able to repair tissue. It increases the amounts of neuroregenerative factors, which is really cool because typically people used to think that once you've destroyed brain cells, they're gone. And now we know that there's very novel compounds that start to reverse that. So we can start to grow back brain tissue. So all of these things are critically important for, recovery and performance. But obviously, as I'm sure Amanda will talk about, there's also some pretty interesting effects for, depression, bipolar, anxiety, all these types of things as well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where I kind of like to take it, because Amanda, you talked a little bit about that, holding yourself close to the fire, and earlier where we talked about it, we talked about that mental toughness, competing at the level that you do, right? And I talked about not being able to put my feet in front of one another during these tough workouts, and that's not something that you experience, but you take this to a whole another level. What has this done from you? And then I really do want to get into the kind of neuro benefits that this has. But what's this done for me for a concentrating, a focus level in when you're actually doing the workouts?
Yeah, look, I just find this whole holding myself to that flame, the fire, like actually standing in the fire. That's my analogy for really being in that zone and pushing yourself to the place that you must go, that others are not willing to hold themselves to. And I think that really sets the elite apart. But what I'm finding recently, and again, it's a perfect analogy, is that I'm not being burned by that fire. I don't feel the fire is as hot. And I'm able to sustain that performance without that level of borderline anguish. There's another aspect to that mental side that I'm finding fascinating and would be really interested in Cliff's feedback, is this level of motivation that I have had to manufacture with white knuckle determination, with every fiber of my being every day, to turn up to that gym and do those 6 hours of training day after day after day, that training that no one ever sees, that is holding myself to the fire. Like, I have to manufacture, like almost artificially manufacture motivation. And what I'm finding over these last 12 weeks is a level of, it's almost like a childlike joy and glee and motivation that is flooding me. It's like the most natural experience of motivation. And I'm having to recalibrate all the things that I've had to come to understand, and the structures and strategies I've had to put in place to be the level of athlete I've been. And this stuff is coming to me naturally. And I would love an answer to why that is so. And wouldn't every other athlete on the planet who's chasing their best want to know and want to experience that for themselves?
There you go, Cliff. Take it away on that.
Well, I think so much of, the game of competing at the high level, and, I've sort of been there to some degree myself as well, is that it's the mental game. And as Amanda talks about it, it can be difficult when you're putting yourself through the fire day in, day out to actually have that motivation and inspiration to get into the gym and get into train every day. A big part of that, obviously, is that neural connection again. And I think that when the brain is fueled really well, and you've got all those other benefits. I mean, it's basically the systemic effect, right? You've got, again, that fuel, you've got the reduction in inflammation, you've got all those things working together to help you to recover better. You're probably just that little bit more resilient to the effects of overtraining. And that's really what we're starting to see when we're not wanting to get into the gym. Is it's not overtraining syndrome per se, but it's the beginning stages that we call overreaching. One of the best ways to work through overreaching is to get more fuel in. But obviously we want to get the right types of fuels in, and we also want to make sure that we're getting, things that are also helping with recovery in a very broad sense of the word. There's also an interesting aspect to that, though. We know that beta-hydroxybutyrate also provides for a very base level of euphoria as well. So that's pretty cool.
That is cool. I mean, I know that kind of this is, and if we can, I'd love to.
Call it keto euphoria. When you went into ketosis, this is back in the 90s, and you knew that you had just got in because you suddenly felt like, whoa, I feel so much better now.
That is absolutely true. Now, Amanda, does that kind of cover your question?
Oh yeah, and I'm all for the euphoria.
I think we all are.
Yeah, there's
Absolutely.
definitely, or, I think that, from a low level athlete, it should, being in the zone when you when your body's obviously producing more ketones, or when you have that heightened level of ketones, there's definitely something there. And I mean, that's, one of the, aside from the physical aspects of this, I know, Amanda, that last year you ran 1,000 kilometers in 31 days for the suicide and mental illness, and this has been, a big part of your life, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's something I've had to live with, and to achieve what I have is, I still find it quite miraculous, and taking ketones is changing my experience of, this suicidal depression that I've lived with. And I think if I ask Cliff about this, he'll probably tell me a similar story to what he's already told us. And, what's going on in the brain and at a neural level is, it's like an inoculation, and rebuilding those neural pathways. And I know for me, I'm an alcoholic of 13 years sober, but, that was a huge part of my life. And I'm not surprised that, based on what Cliff has been explaining, that I'm deriving the most extraordinary benefits, because my brain has been without the tools, the fuel to repair after so many years of, that sort of depression, with depression, living with depression and living with alcoholism. And a lot of that is sugar addiction as well. So I think the repair factor, and I can sense the repair going on at a deeper and deeper and broader level on a daily basis. I'm 12 weeks in. Where will it end, Cliff?
Never ends. I think an interesting aspect of that too is, Amanda mentioned that she is quite hyper-inflammatory, and we can't separate now depression or, a lot of other mental challenges as well from oxidation, from glycation, which is that sugar-related damage, from inflammation, which we know is a big part of the depressive picture now. And so anything that's going to reduce glucose levels while still providing great fuel, it's going to relax the brain and reduce inflammation and oxidation is pretty cool.
Yeah, and this is why this is such a much bigger story. I mean, when I initially heard of your athletic improvements, Amanda, I was like, that's awesome, because it validates that this appeals to people at the highest level of sport. But what's gone on for you, and over the past 3 months from this aspect is just, possibly the most exciting thing about this product, because 1 in 4 people suffer from depression. And so these different disorders, I mean, what do you think, can you kind of, I guess, share a little bit about your experience and what this has meant to you?
Look, this is nothing I could have ever have hoped for. You learn to cope, you learn to manage, you learn to have strategies. And, I honestly thought that I'd probably reached the loftiest standards of health and well-being that I could hope for, having suffered with depression for so many years and having achieved what I had in the face of that. So to suddenly find that there is a exogenous ketones that can provide this benefit, it's a heightened level of well-being that it's indescribable. And maybe that's the unfortunate thing. The only way to truly know is to go and take ketones and know for yourself. And that's basically what I had to do. And I want this experience for everyone else who suffers and who's ever suffered and struggled. And my mother, I have eventually convinced her to start taking ketones. She's been on, today is 3 weeks, and she's been on 24-hour suicide watch. She's been suffering for well over 18 months, majority of my adult life, but chronically in the last 18 months, and 3 weeks on ketones, and she's taking 1 sachet a day. She's 70 years old. She's back at CrossFit. She started 2 years ago and then left it. But she's back doing CrossFit. She's done 2 CrossFit classes a week. She's out riding her bike. She's done 30-kilometer bike rides by herself in the cold in Adelaide. She's been out for what she calls shoggles. They're a cross between jogging and shuffling. And, this is something that absolutely blows my mind. And it's nothing at 70 years old she would ever have hoped for herself. She's had a lot of medication and a lot of support from mainstream, but this is something that she's like a gleeful child. I've never seen anything. I haven't seen this in my adult life from her. 3 weeks. That means a whole lot to me.
And I think Amanda makes a great point about, experiencing this. I was pretty skeptical despite, having been in the field of ketogenic diets for 20 years when I tried it, liked it, kept on trying it. And I think that's the experience we're seeing with people, just if they give it a crack and they experience a benefit from it, then that's the answer. I probably similar to Amanda, I've dealt with a couple of different things for a long period of time. As you guys know, I have Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory condition. And I also suffer with bipolar disorder too, which I've been very open about. I've done a lot of media about that here. And it's not about, for me, having a magic bullet that cures everything. It's about having tools in my toolkit that can help me to stay functional, high performing, and keep on doing the work I want to do. And so if I can have something that allows me to keep on doing that and to keep on, working with people to help them be healthier and happier, then it's going to remain in my toolkit, right? It's an important part of what I do.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is, I guess, Amanda, I'll throw that back to you a little bit. And what would you say to the athletic world that is so skeptical, I guess, about anything new? And so somebody asked there, and I'll kind of pass the question along. What made you decide to try this?
Actually, what made me decide, look, I'd had a lot of athletes and members and friends asking me for my opinion, and they value it and value my integrity. And I was in no position, I had no personal experience with which to respond. And so I guess that was a fairly significant motivator, but a very dear friend had been on ketones for a little while, and she had hounded me with how wonderful it was. And, I just wanted to truly know for myself. I need to speak from a place of personal experience. That's what I have to offer, and that's how I can inspire others. So it was a simple personal experiment, which I really held no hope for. I just needed to know, and I believed it was probably another fad. And within 3 days, that was without doubt not a fad and not a lie. I've lived with, as I've talked about, depression and alcoholism, but I have sugar cravings. I've always had sugar cravings. And, that's the lesser of the two evils if I'm looking at alcohol. But, and those cravings are with me every day. I have no control. I've always had no control over the food I ate. So I exercised more to maintain at least a level of, healthy body weight. But in 3 days, I had no cravings. I wasn't looking for that block of chocolate in the afternoon and after dinner at night and to start and not be able to stop. I have really I've had zero cravings for 3 months, which for me is another, like anyone who's been a slave to those cravings knows what kind of an extraordinary, phenomenal freedom that is providing to me. And I had to admit inside 3 days that there was no doubt. It's remarkable. The list of benefits knows no depth, it would seem.
Well, it's a great last question. I mean, for Cliff, in that, we're hearing this a lot from an addiction standpoint to a number of different things. And certainly one of those things on a major level is sugar. So what's the science behind why people are, from a simplest standpoint, craving less carbs and sugar?
That's a really good question. I mean, we know that there are physiological drivers for sugar, right? And without anything else considered, we need to deal with those at some level, right? We can't just override compulsive behaviors through willpower alone. there's going to be physiological drivers and there's going to be other behavioral condition things that are coming in as well. So if we can take out that physiological driver, in other words, your brain is screaming out for glucose because it's had some injuries and things like that and it needs fuel, or your body's screaming out for glucose because it needs to reduce a stress response. You know, all these things are basically playing in together. If we can take that big part out of the puzzle, then someone, you know, like Amanda, for example, who obviously has extremely good, you know, strong willpower, is committed, you know, is functional, those types of things, then you can step over the hurdle. So you've got to basically remove the physiological block so that then you can exercise your willpower and you can use your neuropsychophysiological bridge to then put in place the behaviors that are going to allow you to get, you know, further. So this is one of the interesting things is we're looking basically at it now as the things we do will help us to obviously get results. And then, you know, basically in a behavioral sense, but then those things as well are driving our behaviors. So it's a feedback loop and we need to have both of those things working well together. So if we can take exogenous ketones, let's say they didn't really actually work. They do, but let's just, you know, suppose for a second they didn't, but they were still allowing people to be satiated and all this kind of stuff. And behaviorally, it was then changing them. So they were losing weight, or they were getting through addictions, or they were getting through, you know, compulsive activity and craving, then it would still be of benefit. The great thing is we know that there's all these other things that are mechanistically working too. So we've basically got both those things working together.
Well, so I really think, you know, I just want to thank you both for, you know, being so open, you know, with your experiences and sharing those with people. And it certainly is, you know, it's exciting, the research that's coming out about things. But I guess what is most exciting about the research that's coming out is that it is, you know, explaining why people are having these phenomenal results. And that is what is moving more people towards this conversation, moving more people towards skepticism. And it's certainly why I'm so passionate about the business model, because it's brought, you know, awesome people like you together to share your experiences with other people. And where do you find, you know, a product that drives people wanting so passionately for other people to experience this than something like this? I mean, it's just awesome. You know, I hope this is the first of many chats that we can have with the two of you as we, you know, as more information comes out and as both of your results continue. And I just want to say, I mean, you know, in kind of closing, please go and visit. If you think that you don't know people that are having mental health issues, you do. Right. Mm-hmm. And for anyone that is experiencing any of these challenges, like there is help out there. There's things that can help. Certainly go to Amanda's website. I'm going to post it with the recording of this, but it's amandacrossfitallen.com. Is that right? Let's check.
Pretty good.
Yeah, nice. And definitely, you know, from a standpoint of, you know, Cliff has always been so giving with his time. And I'm also going to be posting a web link to a Patreon account, which is like a crowdfunding that will help further the research on ketones, ketosis, carb appropriate diets, and what these can do for people right here in our neck in the woods. And I think it's so important. I think everybody, you know, would agree. And look, I won't keep you guys too long, but Amanda, Cliff, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks, guys.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Inspiring.
I'm going to unmute everybody so you can thank these two wonderful people as well. And everybody, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. Amanda, you're awesome.
Legends.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We're coming soon. Share with many.
Needing that cold sausage?